Welcome to an afternoon of prose with Richard Mirabella and Ben Purkert. My name is Sophia Bannister. I work closely with our program director, Jennifer Franklin, who's here with us on Zoom today. And we're thrilled to have you here in person in our beautiful Phillips Manor train station in Sleepy Hollow. Whether you're here with us at the center in person or you're on Zoom, thank you so much for joining us to celebrate two debut novelists, Richard Mirabella and Ben Purkert. I want to thank our founder, the award-winning poet, Margot Taft-Seaver, whose vision and hard work are responsible for the Hudson Valley Writers Center embarking on its 35th year. I want to thank the board, the members, our students and our teachers who are the beating heart of the center, as well as our generous funders, NISCA and Arts Westchester, as well as the foundations who support us, including Vidale, David G. Taft, Lucille and Paul Maslin, Gannett, St. Faith's House, Alan B. Silka Foundation, NY Community Trust, and Sand Charitable Trust. Thank you to my colleagues, our wonderful program director, Jennifer Franklin, here on Zoom, Christina Papadopoulos and Misty Yarnall for their hard work and vision of bringing poetry and prose to an ever-growing audience in person and by Zoom. If this is your first time joining us for a reading, welcome. We will have copies of Richard Mirabella's Brother and Sister Enter the Forest and Ben Purkert's The Men Can't Be Saved available for purchase here at the center after the reading. And for those of you on Zoom, Jennifer will be putting the links to purchase the books in the chat. First up reading is Richard Mirabella. Richard Mirabella is a writer and civic servant living in the Hudson Valley. His stories have appeared in American Short Fiction, Split Lip magazine, Wigleaf, and elsewhere. His debut novel, Brother and Sister Enter the Forest, was published in March 2023 by Catapult. It was called a revelation in a rave review in the New York Times and was named a most anticipated book of the year by Salon, Vulture, Chicago Review of Books, LGBTQ Reads, and Electric Literature. So please join me in welcoming Richard Mirabella.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. It's so wonderful to be here. It's such a beautiful place. I walked in and I was, oh, all this dark wood. It feels so fancy. And I'm really thrilled to be reading with Ben. I just finished his book a couple of days ago, and it's so fantastic. I highly, highly recommend it. Okay, so I'm gonna time myself. So I'm going to read just a few sections of the book. It goes back and forth through time. So in the present, Justin, the brother, has come back into the sister Willa's life. And then I'll read a section or two from when they were teenagers. Out of her scrubs, Willa examined herself in the bathroom. On her upper thigh, she discovered a vague hand-shaped mark from where a patient named Mr. Friedkin had slapped her. How the blood rushes to the skin like it wants to get out. Willa had just finished cleaning one of the sores on his leg and he hit her. An accident, he said, a reflex. But she was certain that he enjoyed remembering the feeling of his hand striking her. True, he was an old man, but when she looked at the red mark on her thigh, she burned. After her shower, she dripped around the apartment and landed on the futon. Explosion sounds rose up from the TV in Mrs. Flores' apartment downstairs. On the coffee table, her phone murmured a text from her brother. Justin's first transmission in a long time, almost a year. Half my building collapsed. It had to be a lie. She put the phone down by her leg, continued to make noise. I have no home. I'm on a bench in the park wrapped in a coat. A man gave me 50 cents. She heard katydids sawing in the trees as if she were in the park with him. She'd never visited him in Albany. She lived in New Paltz, a few towns over from their childhood home in Locust, almost 2 hours from Albany. She never wanted to leave Locust. Many of her high school classmates had left, moved to Manhattan or California or the South. She didn't blame them. There There weren't many jobs here, and the winters were brutal and sunless. In New Paltz, students from the nearby college took over during the school year. During the summer, cars lined Main Street, heading to the Shawangunk campgrounds in the Mohonk Preserve. Willa lived on a quiet street, far enough away from Main Street that she couldn't hear the bands playing in the bars. "Can I come?" Justin texted. "I have nowhere to go." But it had been too long, and she didn't know him anymore. She wanted to be happy and free of his pain. He would find someone else if she never answered. She put on her robe and stood in front of the refrigerator and ate almost an entire bag of cherries, leaving behind bloody pits. Afterward, she closed herself in the workroom and sat at her desk while her stomach decided what it wanted to do with all the cherry meat. At her desk, she looked inside her latest diorama. Inside the box, she and Justin floated in impossibly blue water, public pool water. You looked into it from the top like a god. Hello, little things. The figures were naked. They were meant to be young, underage, before you were allowed to have a body. This moment at the pool had really happened. She remembered it this way. He'd woken her some night when they were still friends, and they'd walked in the dark to the Locust Village Park, hopping the fence to the pool. Justin removed his clothes. She must have averted her eyes, but remembered him, a mere mortal, soft and plump at the time, with hair on his tummy. That night, she'd surprised herself by going over the fence with him. Dead frogs littered the bottom of the pool. A cherry burp surprised her. She placed tiny paper leaves on the water's surface with tweezers. A simple piece with little going on. Anyone but her would see nothing meaningful. So she'd failed, but continued to work on it anyway. When Luke arrived, she helped him out of his clothes and put him on the futon. She liked to roll the condom on and for him to watch her do it. She climbed on top of him. They had met 3 months ago at a bar animal people went to. That's how her best friend Jenny described it. Luke was a vet student, like Jenny. Large animal clinic. A group of sturdy people took up 5 seats at a table with Willa among them. Earlier that day, the students had gone to look at a cow with a small window in its side so they could see its digestive organs. Luke told her all about it and kissed her in the parking lot while she smoked a cigarette she'd stolen off someone's table. Luke's body was solid and nice to touch and squeeze, but he was losing his hair and wore glasses that didn't suit his face. He had a perfect past. He spoke about his brothers and sisters as if they were all friends. Instead of driving, he often ran to her apartment and jumped in her shower first thing. As she orgasmed, she braced herself by putting her hands on his shoulders. Afterward, he disposed of the condom and dressed, too square to lie around naked. Nothing about his personality drew her to him, but she liked his body and the sex. Eventually, she'd know what to do about him. Maybe next time we'll make it to the bed, Luke said. As a kid, he possessed beautiful, dirty blonde curls which had fled when he reached 20. He told her this the first night they met, after he'd taken off his baseball cap. Not the next time, she said, but the time after that. She rested on the futon with her robe underneath her until someone knocked on the door and she was forced to put it on again. Justin couldn't have arrived so suddenly, but here he was, looking like a dug-up tree root. Her brother. She hugged him quickly, and it felt real, not obligatory. His body heat radiated under his clothes, and he was bony and unfamiliar. Something about the person he'd become repelled her. He was older, 34, but he felt like her younger brother. He must have been fighting. There was a cut healing on his lip and a yellowish tone to his cheeks. She wanted to ask who had hurt him, but he obviously didn't want to be asked questions. You smell like pond water, she said. Justin pointed to the man on the couch. Who's that? Hurry, get in, Willa said. I'm Luke, Luke said, and held his hand out. Justin let it hang there for too long, so Justin withdrew it. Luke withdrew it. This is my brother, Willa said. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you he was coming. She forgot to invite me too, Justin said. He gently kicked a crate filled with odds and ends on the floor. You turned into a pack rat. Not really, she said. Unpacked boxes slumped next to the TV. Justin kept rubbing a weird, crusty stain on the leg of his jeans. His fingernails were dirty. He sat on the futon next to Nick. It was as if Justin had fallen through the roof and landed here covered in plaster dust. She hurried into the bedroom and changed, hyperventilating as she pulled on a t-shirt and pajama pants. It took forever to put on clothes, and she left Justin and Luke alone together. When she entered the living room again, she wiped sweat from her upper lip. I haven't been sleeping, Justin told them. At all? Luke said. I must have at some point. Otherwise you'd be dead, Luke said. The skin around Justin's eyes was red. He'd rubbed at them too much. And when he spoke, Willa smelled a familiar scent, a relative of the stink of manure from the fields by their childhood home. He didn't take care of himself. As a kid, he had primped in the mirror in a way that she never had. She hoped he didn't sense that she had just had sex right in the spot he was sitting. Luke's face showed nothing but interest in Justin, no shame or embarrassment. She sat on the floor between Luke's legs. Who is this guy? Justin said. Who exactly is this gentleman? You know who he is, Willa said. He told you. Does he need to be here? I can leave if you want. I don't want you to leave, Willa said and rubbed his calf. I would appreciate it, Justin said. What is your problem? Willa struggled to her feet. I think Willa wants me to stay, Luke said. You want a drink or something? Justin's eyes rolled, exposing the whites, and she was afraid he might be having a seizure. Do you need a buffer with me, Willa? I have important things to talk to you about, and I would prefer not to have an audience with spectacles. Luke didn't react. Justin stared at him, leaned back on the futon and closed his eyes. You know who dresses like that? Unassuming psychopaths, Justin said. One day, this guy is going to be caught decapitating little girls or something. A disaster, Willa stood in front of him and kicked his shoe so he would pay attention to her instead of Luke. It was a real pleasure, Luke said. She followed him out of the apartment and down the stairs, and he didn't speak again until they were in the street by the car. He leaned on it and crossed his arms. That was interesting. I'm sorry, she said. Do you need help? He glanced at the house. What? No, of course not. I'll call you. Just wait for me to call you. He got into the car without touching her, started the engine and drove away. She stood watching the car go and waited for a while. What did you say to him? Justin asked when she came back through the door. She hated that the weaker he got, the more she wanted to kick his ass. I said you wouldn't be here long, Willa said. You didn't matter. You're not a real part of my life. I'll apologize to him. You won't have the opportunity. She sat on the futon. Is it so wrong that I want to be alone with you? After not seeing you for so long, Justin said. Then you show up with this guy who I don't know. You showed up. Why are you here? Her legs and back ached. She spread out to find some relief. I told you my building collapsed. Oh, come on. You don't believe me? You think nothing bad can ever happen to me again? I'm telling the truth. It was on the news. She kept silent so long. He shook the leg of her pajama pants. I have to get up really early, she said. Did Mom ask about me? No, she said. So tired now. Her throat went numb. Where was the mention of their mother? They never talked about her without fighting. You didn't mean I don't matter. I am part of your life. You are, she said. She turned to face the back of the futon, the rope of sleep pulling at her head. She dreamed about him, sliding out from under her legs and going off to find a safe place to sleep. So this is now when they're teenagers and Justin has climbed up onto the roof to sun himself. Justin climbed out the attic window and spread his body on the roof. He wore only a pair of briefs. The attic window, like an eye behind him, it gleamed. He gleamed like a sea creature. Their mother was not home. Willa imagined Justin slipping off the roof and splattering his brains on the broken driveway. Their father would be mortified if he were alive to see his half-naked son on the roof. She went to the top of the house and put her head out the attic window. Heat radiated off the black roof shingles. She smelled Justin cooking in the air. He turned over on the towel. Don't come out, he said. You'll fall. I don't have to live with the guilt of killing you for the rest of my life. Get in here, dumbass. You don't care about looking like raw bread dough, but I do. He turned away and put his hands behind his head. A few feet away, a wasp nest bulged out of the eaves, filled with thin black and yellow bodies. One crawled out of its cell and zoomed across her vision. Willow pulled herself inside and locked the window. That night, Justin lay naked and burnt on the bed. Help me, he said. Jesus fucking Christ. Willer heard him first. Then their mother came running into the room. He was on the roof, Willa said. She put her hand over her mouth, but it slipped out. She tried not to notice his naked butt. He must have taken his underwear off at some point. His ass was as red as the rest of him. When he tried to get back into the house and found the window locked, he called and called for her like a dumb giant bird. She listened to him for a while, trying to be mean the way he was with her, but eventually she went up to let him in. On the roof, Grace said, naked? No, Justin said, she's lying. What do you mean, no? I can see your bright red ass from myself. Grace sat on the edge of the bed and handled his body, examining him. He shrieked. His skin looked bloody. Mom, stop it. Please stop, Willa said. What a terrible thing you've done to yourself, Grace said. Her voice had softened, the anger fizzing out. I'm sorry you're in so much pain, but it's your fault. Willa ran to the kitchen and took frozen aloe leaves out of the freezer and brought them to her mother. The leaves had fallen off, the giant plant that had lived in the front window since the beginning of Willa's memories. Grace snapped one in two and slathered the yellowish juice on her fingers and painted Justin with it. To escape his screams, Willa ran from the room. Later, she sat on the floor among Justin's clothes. Their mother was sleeping. You don't have to stay with me, she said. Willa tanned but never burned. Her mother said it was because she'd inherited Sicilian skin from distant relatives who worked on boats and pulled octopi out of the sea. I'm going to puke, Justin said. Willa jumped to her feet to get out of his path. Instead of rushing to the bathroom, he raised his head off the pillow, locked eyes with her, and emptied his guts on the water. She had once loved Justin too much, crushed on him. She hated to think about it. If only she'd been too young to remember, but it must have been when she was 7 or so. It was obvious, too. You're getting older, her mother said. You can't flirt with everyone anymore, especially Justin. I never imagined I'd have to explain this to you. I know that, Willa said. But no, it hadn't occurred to her that she should love her brother in a specific way. She remembered wanting to learn how to be alone, to not need him. She walked in the fields behind the house at the edge of the woods. She lay in the grass for a long time, long enough that she saw herself lying there and she was no longer a human being. A katydid helicoptered onto her arm and didn't realize it had landed on a person. When she'd gotten back to the house, her body loose and her mind in the grass, her mother jolted her awake and held her by the arm. "Are you insane?" her mother said. Willa examined herself, covered in grass and seeds and ticks, which her mother picked off one by one until she gave up and ordered Willa out of her clothes. They stood on the patio in the backyard, and Willa stripped as slowly as possible. "Hurry up," her mother said. "What do you think? The rabbits are taking pictures?" I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Richard, for that reading. Up next, we have Ben Purkert, who is the author of the poetry collection For the Love of Endings. His work appears in The New Yorker, The Nation, and The Kenner Review, among others. He is the founder of Backdraft, a Guernica review series focused on revision and the creative process. He holds degrees from Harvard and New York University, and he currently teaches at Rutgers. His debut novel, The Men Can't Be Saved, was named most anticipated book of the summer 2023 in Nylon, The Millions, Lit Hub, Debut Full, and more. Please help me welcome Ben Purkert.
Hi. This is such an incredible, should I use the mic?
You don't need to be.
Okay, all right, I'll be loud. This is such an incredible space. So great to be here with you all. Richard's book is phenomenal and so beautiful and so tender. I took that great train ride where you can see the river the whole way, which was annoying because I was just rereading Richard's book and appreciating it, feeling like I should be looking at the river. This is beautiful, that's beautiful. So this is a section I've never read before. It's a little vulgar at the beginning. We only have one minor, I think, but like the minor is like super minor. So I'm hoping it's so minor that we can, the memories are just fade real quick. This is the scene between Seth, my main character. My main character is a tagline copywriter at a branding agency. Some of my friends and former colleagues are here today, so that's especially fun. And Seth, our copywriter, is on a business trip with Moon, who is more senior than him at the agency and has a lot of strong opinions about a lot of things, as you're about to find out. They work at an agency called Razorbeat, and they are currently at the airport, and the client that they have been tasked with is a prostate cancer research organization. And I think that's all you need to know. Vulgar at the beginning, but then you'll pass that. I don't know, like the dark wood, it feels it. We're just gonna go for it. You ready? Here we go. The thing is, Moon said, clients are addicts. Soon enough, their nostrils burn out. Then we start dealing them shit. I'm talking about actual shit, straight out of our asses. They still take it. Let's be honest, and I'm not talking about you, Seth. But our work sucks dead donkey dick. No offense, not your fault, not Razorbeat's fault. All agencies are basically the same. Hey, maybe you're interviewing. Maybe headhunters are banging down your door, selling you on some boutique shop in Dumbo, treadmill desks, foosball tables, fuckable interns. But ask yourself, why are they bending over backward? It's because they're desperate. They'd kill to be Razorbeat. They'd kill just like that. I set down my beer on the airport bar's countertop. Moon indeed looked like his headshot, though his features appeared coarser in person. He wore his blonde hair in an uncombed sweep. His nose jutted out with immodesty. As he spoke, his mouth opened wide around each word before smacking shut. In sum, he was very large and he was very loud. And yet, even as he boomed, his face had a pinched quality, like someone had given it a good squeeze before letting go. Moon was tapping away at his laptop. He stopped to sip his bourbon, then spun the screen around toward me. "This it?" he asked. I scanned the title slide of the presentation, quote, "Prostate Cancer Research Group Tagline Presentation," and I nodded. The file, I declared proudly, was ready for upload. He swooped his index finger to the return key, then enlisted it to dig excess wax out of his ear. At 29, Robert Moon McClune, was just 3 years older than me, though he held an impressive distinction, the youngest razor beater ever to make partner. From what I pieced together, Moon, as everyone called him, possessed a single talent, infectious freneticism. Upper management had taken note of his attention deficit disorder and diagnosed it as promising. He had the kind of motor that, if harnessed, could power a long and fruitful career. It was all bullshit, of course. He had nothing to offer the agency, nothing of real value. He was simply adept at toggling back and forth between multiple accounts, and the speed of this toggling gave the false impression he was managing an overwhelming number of accounts at once, a bounty of unspeakable proportions. It was absurd that he'd risen so quickly up the ranks, but it couldn't be helped. Every agency has its fair share of Moons. As we waited for our connection to be announced, I told him I was excited. Prostate, I believed, could go big. What happened? I read this section. He said nothing in response. Then he turned over his bourbon with a few slow-paced swirls. Nonprofits, he said, are the worst goddamn clients. True or false? There was a presentation to focus on, I said. I wasn't inclined to play games. True, he answered. And you want to know why? I figured I knew what he'd say. Something about philanthropic clients demanding discounts, charities wanting charity, etc. He set down his glass hard on its coaster. It's because those people are fucking miserable. And honestly, can you blame them? Imagine your day job was raising money for cancer research. You tell yourself you're changing the world, doing the Lord's work, whatever. Then you shoot an ad with a terminal case. Maybe you meet her kids, eat her tuna casserole, and see her suffering up close. I mean, you really get to know her. And when it's over, you even call from time to time, just to keep in touch. And the ad turns out great. It's a real tearjerker. But then what happens? It goes live and nobody gives. I looked away from Moon just to dodge the sharp end of his gaze, listening for our boarding call. Sure, he went on, the big donors come through as always, but the general public, they don't blink. And pretty soon, you know what? You check out. Too fucking hard. He sipped again. And you stop calling that poor lady, because really, what can you say? What was his point exactly, I think? It was difficult to imagine any organization more worthy of Razorbeat's services than one fighting cancer. If the nonprofit was struggling with fundraising, we could help. A great tagline was the key. Silence pooled between us, so I splashed right on through. Nonprofits, I said, do really good work. He yawned at me. What I mean, I said firmly, is that they make an impact. No guarantee, he said, not even 50-50. My brother used to work for Hope Vision. Hope Vision, I said. They're a redistributor, basically. They ask people to donate their eyeglasses, then hand them out to poor people with the same prescription. Nice, right? And they trek all around the globe, even the most bumblefuck villages. That's how some granny in Uganda ends up with a pair of Warby Parker hipster frames. But remember, these people are dirt poor, never seen glasses, let alone worn them. They open their eyes and freak out. They're hugging everyone because everything's in focus. A whole new world, incredible ad, incredible publicity. So what's the problem? Moon dipped closer. His hair was so blonde, it looked raw. After one day with the glasses, he said, they bury them, literally buried in the ground. Too scary. I turned my focus to the terminal's automated walkways. Well-dressed businessmen passed with the smooth run of a new razor. Imagine, he said, you're living in Uganda, and you're married 50 years to some bastard, and he's a blurry piece of shit. But then, for the first time, you really see him. Warts, wrinkles, all of it. But hey, you'd still love him, right? You could deal. But then you see yourself in the mirror. That's murder. You dump the eyeglasses in the ground and you never look back. I resisted the impulse to venture off to the gate alone. Fine, Hope Vision was a failure, so what? Failure, he said. Are you kidding? They raised almost 100 million last year. They play that ad and everybody empties their pockets. The operation just keeps expanding. I still wasn't sure what his point was, if there was one. I insisted it was time to head to our gate. I was going to give the presentation with or without him. There they go. He yanked his computer charger out of the wall socket, its teeth dragging on floor tile. It makes you wonder, he said, reeling it in slow, looping all that slack around his forearm. All those eyeglasses, he said. He paused at his last loop and dreamed big for a moment. Who's gonna dig them up? Thanks.
If we could get both of you back up here, that would be great, and then I will try to get out of the way because we would love to have really a conversation between the two of you, but I will get the ball rolling. But the question that we often like to ask, for anyone who may be writing their first book of fiction, what advice might you have for them? And also, you know, when was the moment in which you realized that maybe you were sitting on something that was longer, that was a full-length book and not a short story or perhaps a poem?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. So, okay, I'll do advice first. Some of it's very practical advice, and it's to write scenes. I think it's very easy to get stuck. And one of my big problems was getting sort of bogged down and like, oh, there has to be so much writing, you know, for it to be a novel. And I was talking to a friend who wrote sort of a very fast, like minimal, sharp novel that I loved. And she just said, write scenes. It's like, oh, it seems so simple, but it really does help. And you just keep moving forward. It's about forward momentum. So that's my advice. It's not pretty, but I think it works. And then this is the first novel I ever wrote from beginning to end. And I refused to say I was writing a novel for a long time because I didn't trust myself to actually do it. I don't like doing anything that anyone tells me to do, including myself. So I was like, oh, it's a project, it's a project. And then when I finished a first draft, which was just an absolute disaster, there was zero resemblance to this. Then I said, oh, this is a novel, and I want it to be a novel. I think I know what I want it to be like. And then I spent the next 4 years trying to make it into that thing.
Yeah. For me, you know, my background is in poetry. And I had this, I left the agency where I was working, the branding agency, and I went to get an MFA in poetry. And I had all these poems, and I was really lucky. I mean, I've been rejected for a long time, but I was starting to get poems picked up in journals. And I thought, okay, great, this is happening. You know, surely there's a publisher just dying to take my poetry manuscript and make it into a book. Surely this is going to happen. You're right to laugh. Surely this is going to happen really quickly. Of course it didn't, right? Of course I got a lot of rejection, and I was just stuck creatively because sometimes you feel like you're in that place where you've taken the manuscript as far as you can take it. And I was messing with poems that shouldn't be messed with. I was trying to write new poems into a book that felt done. And so I just realized that I needed a new creative project. And I think that moving into a new genre, I had read a lot of fiction, but I'd never written fiction before. I'd never taken a fiction class before. I'd taken a ton of poetry classes. It was liberating because frankly, I didn't know what I was doing. And I also didn't have any pressure on myself. I didn't expect that this was something that would be published ever. All of those expectations were on the poetry side, because that's where I had the degree, that's where I had taken the classes. Fiction was just play. And I think that that enabled me to get playful, to write a book that that moved in some unexpected ways, that had some loud characters. I didn't have voices in my head telling me what I was supposed to do. On the back end, though, it created a lot of work because the first draft for this novel took like 6 weeks, but the revision took almost a decade because I didn't know what I was doing, right? The very thing that had enabled me to move quickly at the beginning, I paid for on the back end. But I think that's not, I don't think that's bad. You know, I think writing a first draft really quickly and then inviting more rigor into the process on the back end, I think can be, I don't know, for me, it was what I needed to do.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think on either end, you're gonna get that work. You know, I mean, the first draft of Brother and Sister took me a month to write, and then I spent the next few years just revising it. And I had zero expectations about publication. And it's a lot easier to write a novel when you've got zero expectations about publication. Now I'm working on my second one. It's taken me 3 years to get 40,000 words into a first draft. And there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, well, nobody wants it, you know. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. I said you agreed with you.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
For folks who haven't read Richard's book, it moves around in time in this really beautiful and commanding way. You're never lost, but you do sort of like juxtapose different scenes together. Did you write it chronologically in the first draft, or were you even at the beginning sort of just, you know, jumping around?
That's what took me so long, is it never felt right.
Yeah.
I wrote it in a linear fashion at first, and I didn't like it.
Yeah.
And I kept sort of trying to make it that, you know, and I thought, oh, maybe the first half will be their teenagers, the second half will be grown up. And then it wasn't until later when I thought, like, what if I just shatter it and just organize it like emotionally? And it doesn't matter where we are in time. And then it just became interesting to me. It was like a puzzle. And I started putting it together, and it became more closer to this vision I had.
Did you shatter it? Was that a piece of advice that an outside reader or a teacher gave you, or did you just feel that yourself?
No, I just felt it myself. And also, this might sound a little strange. A band I really loved put out an album. This band Throwing Muses put out an album called Purgatory Paradise, and it's really a strange record because there are small parts of songs that reappear later, as if they took the full song and sliced it up. And I just loved that. I thought it was such an interesting experiment. And that partially inspired that idea. So yeah, that's kind of where that came from. So I have to make a comment, which is just poets, because I just love that, the audacity of like, I'm a poet, I'm gonna write a novel, and you just did it. Like,
10 years though, Richard.
I know, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, fiction writers spend 10 years writing novels, you know, that's kind of, yeah, that's a long time, but makes sense. I'm just wondering a little bit about what kind of fiction you were reading as a poet, and also a second part to that is how the language of poetry inspired you to write while you were writing fiction.
Yeah.
Because I have to say, often when I read first person narratives, I'm not really impressed by the language. I sometimes am left wanting a little bit. But the language in your book is really, really beautiful. There are just stunning images that stop me. It makes so much sense because you're a poet. And the way Seth used the world, he views it as a writer, he thinks of himself as a writer. So we're allowed to kind of enjoy the way he's seen it. So I guess like who,
Yeah.
not so much who inspired you, but what's your, like your workbook of fiction?
You know, thank you for the question.
Okay.
For the kindness. The book that unlocked a lot for me, sometimes the right book just reaches you at the right moment, I think, whether as a reader or as a writer. And for me, that was Ben Lerner's Leaving the Atocha Station. Have you read that?
I haven't.
That was so good.
I need to. Yeah.
But I wonder if, I mean, part of why I loved it so much was, so I had just finished my MFA. Ben Lerner was my favorite poet. I don't know if anyone in this room reads him. He's so brilliant and so strange. And I was just really drawn to his poems. And when he published Leaving the Atocha Station, his first novel, short novel with Coffee House Press, about a really neurotic character who is himself a poet, it just felt so effortless. I mean, it's also first person. Ben Lerner has a gift where, you know, you're just sort of in a consciousness, and it felt like the kind of thing that he wrote over a weekend, probably stoned. And I read it. Also, our names sound similar. Ben Purkert, Ben Lerner. I was like, maybe I could try. Maybe I could try something like this. Like here we have a poet who just, you know, made the move and attempted something. Now again, I paid for it later, but that was a book that opened a door for me because there have been poets writing novels for forever. But I do think that Ben Lerner, Ocean Vuong, like within the last decade or so, has opened a bit of a floodgate situation where we're now seeing a whole lot of poets write novels. But when Lerner did it, it was pretty unusual at the time. When that book entered, I felt like I had something.
You write that crazy essay.
Yeah, the hatred of poetry. Yeah. Yeah. It's an essay that they turned into a slim book. It's interesting. Did you read it?
Yes,
Yeah.
so, this is a question, but, did you ever work for a nonprofit?
Did I ever work for a nonprofit? I did. Well, now you put me on the spot. Have you seen those, like, by the way, or no? Is it
No,
okay?
that's okay.
It's okay.
Which
Okay, great.
sounds.
I was looking at a woodshed, area. I'm not.
Oh, got it.
And, he both smiled when he started, I mean, he nailed the problems of nonprofits. I mean, it's so true.
I was worried to get the pitchfork out and well, you know, thanks for saying that. And working in an agency, we always wanted to work on the nonprofit clients, right? Like no one, I mean, I was in my 20s when I worked at the agency. I didn't want to work for big oil. I didn't want to work for big healthcare or finance or any of that. I wanted to work for nonprofits that I could, you know, feel invested in. But those relationships were always the most complicated, right? Because they weren't the ones like keeping the lights on at the agency. And they felt it because they were sort of resentful because they weren't getting the best work. And we were resentful. I mean, they almost always, not always, but they very frequently, it was hard. It was challenging, right? Because you want the job to be one thing, but then there are necessities that pull you in another direction. For my character, I mean, him getting staffed on this prostate cancer research group, you're meeting him at a time where he's come to terms with it and he's decided it's going to go big. But when he first gets staffed on it, he's annoyed. He wants to be on Coca-Cola. He wants to be on Lexus. He doesn't want to be on some tiny little brand. But he's gonna get what's coming though. Should we open it up for questions? Sure.
Richard, I have a question for you. It sounds like you're writing the next book for an audience. Can you do that?
Well, that's a good question. So far, the answer to that is no. Though it's getting better, I have to say. I feel like I am starting to get excited about the actual book and the process of it and having more fun. In the beginning, I was just sort of like, I have to write another book. And I put a lot of pressure on myself and it wasn't fun. And I was thinking, what if, my publisher rejects it, what if people don't like, all of these things. And now I have a few years into it, and I'm just excited and happy. So I think eventually you get there, and you get back to what it's really about, which is writing things and having a good time and trying stuff out.
Do you have a day job?
I do. I work at the University of Albany in a small office, I'm an administrative assistant. I actually wrote an essay about it in Catapult magazine about writing the day job. And it's hard. It is hard to sit in front of the computer all day and then get home and I'm going to write fiction now. But it's also, I don't know what I would do without writing. So I want to do it, even though I'm tired. But also my job is really kind of just a nice job. It's not, I don't take it home really, so it's a good job for me.
Ask you, you worked at an agency.
Yeah.
The novels written in the first person. How do you handle people saying to you, I had no idea that happened to you, even though it's fiction?
Yeah. It's so funny you ask that because it's probably the single thing in interviews that I was least prepared for. Like as a poet, like writing poems and writing fiction, one of the differences is that when you publish a book of fiction, people seem to want to interview you, whereas when you write a book of poetry, I didn't have a whole bunch of magazines knocking down my door saying they want to interview me, right? So that experience was different. But then the other thing that people never ask poets, well, I don't want to say never, and I do think that confessionalist poets get asked this, and it can be sort of problematic, the question of like, you write about this traumatic thing, what did it feel like in real life? Assuming that the person had that there was no distance between speaker of the poem and the poet, right? I think that can be offensive or at least, a bit dodgy as a question. I wasn't expecting it, and it has been almost always the first question that I'm asked. So you worked at an agency, Seth worked at an agency. Basically, what if this book is your real life? And my character makes some terrible decisions. I mean, he's a mess. I think he's really funny at times, but he makes a lot of decisions that I would never make. And, I don't have a good answer except to say, I think that we should be careful about asking fiction writers that question. I think that we have to really be clear about genre distinctions, and especially when you've got a character who's maybe unlikable, or especially when there's charged material in the book, which, let's be honest, there's always charged material in a book, that we're not presuming one equals the other, which is not to say that my life experiences didn't inform this book. They absolutely did. My character worked in an agency that resembled very much the agency that I worked at. When I left the agency, when he left the agency, he goes to work as a barista at a coffee shop. I worked as a barista at a coffee shop. He goes on Birthright. I went on Birthright. There's some evident overlap. But I also always want to just say it's completely different. It's a novel.
Yeah, I think we're living through, oh, sorry.
Sure. Yeah, Jen and I used to work together at an agency.
Too bad for that.
Well, was it difficult to decide to write in the first person than say the third person limited?
Thank you for vouching for me, Jen. No, thank you. No, it wasn't a difficult decision because I even wasn't conscious of the decision, right? I did not have it in my mind that I was a novelist, that I was writing a novel. So I wasn't sitting there thinking, what is my point of telling? What is my arc? First person just felt like talking. And I had the voice for this character, and I mean, he very much is a parody of different people that I may have worked with, but also a work of imagination. So first person was all I had available to me. It just felt like talking.
I was just gonna say that we're kind of living in a moment where people are confusing the author with the fiction. Even serious critics are doing that. There was a review of Otessa Moshfegh's Latona, which came out last year, I think, where they were just, oh my God, attacking her, saying she hates, she's ableist, and she, hates fat people, and she's this and she's that. And I'm like, are you talking about her? Or are you talking about the characters in her novel? Those are different things. Remember what fiction is? So yeah, I mean, I was definitely prepared for people to think that what happens to Justin in my book happened to me. And some people did think that. And I have to say, no, they did not. It's fiction.
Are you offended by the question, or are you just so used to it?
No, because I expected it.
Right.
But I don't think we should be asking,
Right.
is this, from your life? The truth is, you use everything.
Right.
You have to. I mean, that's where the raw material comes from. So is it from my life? Yes, a lot of it is from my life. That doesn't mean that the actual plot is my life.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's relevant.
And last thing I'll say on it too is I think, look, it's so hard to get attention for any piece of writing, right? It's so hard, like, it's amazing, this room is full. It's wonderful that you all came out. It's hard to get people into a room for poetry or fiction, for nonfiction too, right? It's a big ask. And so an interview comes to you, especially we're both debut novelists, an interviewer comes to you and maybe you don't love the question. I'm not gonna risk offending anyone by saying, I don't really like your question.
Yeah.
I'm happy to answer anything, right? Tell me to dance, I'll dance. I'm just grateful that people are taking an interest, but in a room like this, I do think there's so many interesting ways into a novel. There's so many interesting ways into a piece of art that I wouldn't characterize it offensive so much as just like, why are we only starting there? There's such a fascinating array of ways in. That's how it is.
Yeah, I agree with you, definitely. There's so much to talk about. I wanted to ask you though, really quick, about revision. I revised 4 short stories and things before I wrote my novel, and I was not prepared for what revising a novel entailed.
Because of the scale.
Just because of the scale and wild. I mean, you have to really take it piece by piece, otherwise you're gonna lose your mind completely. But did revising poetry prepare you at all? Were you is it just a completely different animal totally, like the revision process?
I think being a poet is, on one hand, incredible practice, right? Like, insofar as poetry demands scrutiny of the word, of the syllable, of the image, I think it's like, on some level, I mean, again, in a friendly room, I don't know if I'd say this everywhere. I think learning poetry is in some ways maybe better preparation for writing fiction than the fiction process. Like, there's this thing where I'm a big basketball fan. A lot of the best players, especially the best big men in basketball, didn't play basketball growing up. If you look at someone like Giannis, or if you look at someone like Joel Embiid, they actually grew up playing soccer. And learning soccer at a young age, like that footwork, the small nuances, it's better than if they had been playing basketball from the age of 2. And I'm very careful. I don't want to offend a novelist, but I do think that, like, I think that focus on the micro and some of the things, you don't lose it. So on the one hand, I want to say being a poet is the best preparation you can possibly have. On the other hand, Richard, I was completely unprepared because all of my toolbox was for small scale. Like, I knew how to edit the line. I knew how to edit a single page. The idea that, I still am like traumatized by this. You make a change on page 2 and it just ripples throughout the entire thing. Whereas poems, obviously they work in concert, it's a collection, it's a cohesive body, but at the end of the day, they're discrete objects, right? You make an edit to one poem, it usually, maybe sometimes, but it usually doesn't necessitate rereading the entire manuscript to make sure that there hasn't, like you stepped on a butterfly in this poem and now suddenly like Tokyo was wiped out. Still like butterfly effect in the same way. Whereas fiction, I was constantly struck by how I'd make a tiny edit somewhere and it would alter the course of the history of my book.
Yeah, fully.
Yes.
But no, what you're saying is reminding me of when people say that writing short fiction is preparation for a novel. It's not. It's a completely different animal. But revising small pieces of fiction, a flash or micro, or even short stories, it does give you sort of a toolbox for working on longer piece.
Mhm.
Yeah, the main difference is, you know, if you make a little change in a short story, it's not a big a deal. Or if it fails, or you're like, oh, I don't like this anymore, you just toss it and you're not gonna cry for, you know, a month. Because you spent 4 years working on the novel, you know.
So the revision process can at times become a nightmare, but I know that in the generative phase, the sense of play with the kids I mentioned is really important. When you're revising, is there a way to get the sense of play back, or is it just a different stage altogether?
Yeah, you know, I know the way we're talking about revision sounds like it's so awful. It's actually my favorite part. I think writing a first draft is a nightmare. It's really hard for me. I love revision. I love, like, oh my God, I have this big pile of something to work with, and I like making things better. And then also you begin to see what you're really trying to do, what you really want. And it can really surprise you. So yeah, revision is the best part.
I would say similarly. What's painstaking about revision is the time it takes.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, how many years? But in terms of the actual work, I do find it playful and wonderful, and I'm an anxious person. And just having that draft, like, even if I know it's not that great, it's just, I have something, right?
Yeah.
My anxiety right now, I'm also working on a new project, and I don't have that full draft. I just have a small percentage. And I'm just like, you know, I can feel the anxiety of it. Once I have that first draft, even if it sort of sucks, at least I've got something. And now I can go to work. And even if it takes, you know, a lot of years, I agree, it's fun.
So.
Yes.
Because you were talking about the lens, I'm wondering, if you thought about writing a novella? Because, I mean, I don't read a lot of fiction because a lot of it is long. And I have other things to do with my life, and I don't mean that as an insult. You know,
Get out of here.
but novellas are attractive to me. I'm wondering why, have you thought about writing a novella, 100 words or less, 100 pages or less?
I love a short novel and I love novellas, and I really, really want to write one. And actually my novel is very short. They of course make it seem like it's
How many words?
275 pages, 60,000.
It's not bad, yeah.
That's a pretty short novel, you know. The first draft was only 50, and I wanted it to be short. I like short, sharp book. Yeah, I would love to. I mean, they're very hard to publish. I hate to even think about that, but you can think about it. I don't know. I wish the publisher could get on the novella bandwagon. People love it.
Yeah. I saw this thing recently where in Europe, the novella is all the rage and
I was gonna say translated, you see them all the time.
all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And leaving the Atocha station also, I think, is under 60. I think it's like 50%. So I wish I got to choose the projects that I create. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wish I got to sit there and say, today I will write a noir, today I will, you know, erotica or novella, whatever. I mean, I have no idea what my next project is going to look like, because it's going to be dictated by where the characters want to go, or where the poems want to go. But I love novellas.
Yeah. Going back to revision, what was the idea that started you writing? Like, what was your original idea for your book? And what did you discover during the revision process?
Sure, I'll go. I don't know that I had an idea for the book, right? I'm not sure that I had like a thesis or a concept, but when I was working at this branding agency, it was 2007, it was my first job out of college, and none of my friends knew what it was to work at a branding agency. I got the job and I barely knew what it was to work at a branding agency. And then more or less the first week that I started, Mad Men came out. And all of a sudden, everyone knew what agency was like, or they thought they knew what agency life was like. And it went from this sort of weird, uncool job to like a job that had a lot of social capital. Like, oh, you're a tagline copywriter? That's just like Don Draper or something. And I'd say, no, well, maybe, you know. And like, part of what was interesting about that show and why all my friends at the agency were obsessed with it was that we would talk about it from two perspectives. We would talk about, look at how far things have come from the 1960s. Like there's all these ways in which their job is totally unrecognizable from the technologies we use and things like that. And on the other hand, look at how little it's changed. Like Don Draper types, Roger Sterling types, like those egos, we work with them on a daily basis, right? The same thing that makes that environment so fun and electric and colorful, we felt. But the same things that made it frankly toxic at times, we also felt. And the agency world tells itself how progressive it is. It loves to spin anything, right? And it loves to spin, look at how far we've come. And if you talk to a lot of my colleagues, they would say, you know, not as far as you think. So to me, that was, insofar as the novel has an idea, that was like the genesis point. Wouldn't it be interesting to write a book set in the agency world, not of Mad Men era, but today, and actually be pretty clear-eyed about what has changed and what hasn't?
I don't have ideas. But I have little like, impressions of things, or, you know, and I wanted to write a book about siblings. I don't even have a sister, I have a brother, but I like a brother-sister dynamic. So I just started writing about these two people, and I knew there was conflict, but I didn't know what it was. And then while I was sort of writing this material, I read a fairy tale called Little Brother and Little Sister, which is a Grimm's tale, in which the little brother is transformed into a fawn, and the sister says she'll care for him forever. And then she marries the king and has her whole adventure. And I just kind of took the transformation idea and ran with it. It's not a retelling, but I just like that image. And then built on it. I have to write to sort of get ideas, write ideas.
This question may just be me telling you, like, I really like a line from your reading, but I hope it's more than that. But that line that I'm gonna like misquote about, where she's lying there and an insect doesn't know it's landed on a human body. That was so beautiful, because it's something about like it seems like there's this thing in everything you read about consciousness, having sort of other consciousnesses nested in it. Like I'm moved here actually, because it's not a line about she thought that the insect didn't know. Like there's something about consciousness being beyond, like expanding beyond one person's perspective of including things. I was really struck by it. I don't know if that latches into something you think about, or and me just having a moment out loud inappropriately.
No, I love that. I think I want to try to be a little freer about point of view in my newer fiction, but that is something. Like, I love Virginia. I love sort of shifting consciousness, from person to person. I wish I'd experimented a little bit more. I feel like it's very tight, but there are moments where it feels like it's gone outside of the people. And that is a moment where the Katie lands up there, realizes it's not even a person. Where I didn't know until the book was published, like, oh, that's the insect's point of view. Like, that's interesting, But yeah, I love that. There are books that I can think of now that do that. Rachel Williamson's Paulina and Fran, which is just like a campus social novel, but the POV shifts from person to person. Even characters that we never see again have their moment in a scene. And I love it. Yeah, it's really great.
Maybe we do like 2 more questions? 2 or 3 more questions? Or no more? Yeah.
This is for either one of you, which wants to answer. If you had a day job as a writer, or you had unlimited time for writing, what would you recommend if you wanted to seriously consider writing a novel? What about how many words per day would you say would be what you would consider to be a productive day?
That's hard because I don't give myself those goals, because I would never meet them. But I started doing a thing, Matt Bell, a novelist, put out a great book called Refuse to Be Done. And he talks about writing 300 words, which I loved. So it's like nothing. And you feel like you accomplished something. So I think it really is just about yourself, what you can do without burning yourself out. I can't write 1,000 words a day, and I know people who can go past that like it's nothing. That would be too much for me. And then the next day I would have trouble getting back into it.
Yeah. Similarly, I don't set out daily goals for myself in terms of writing. Because I found they're not helpful. Similarly, I wouldn't meet them. But what I have done is set out goals for myself as a reader. Like this summer, I'm going to read 10 novels, right? Like put on that kind of a goal. Because what I find is that I'm not going to love all 10 of those novels, but 2 or 3 of them I'm going to love, and I'm going to love them so much that I'm going to want to try to get in the game. I'm going to want to write in response to, like not explicitly in response to, but I mean, I'm reading a book right now that, you know, it's just so beautiful, like it makes me want to write. So I have used productivity and applied it to the reading side of it rather than the writing side of it.
I love that. I think that's the way to do it. Right? Reading always makes me want to write. That always works. Another thing I say, and I think is helpful, is to visit the document. Even if you're not going to write, you don't feel like writing, you just open the document and look at it. Oh, your own. Yeah, your own document. Oh, I'm just going to open the novel today and look at it. Inevitably, you're going to add at least a sentence. And a novel is written inch by inch, like really. That's all I've been doing lately. I haven't been sitting there like, I wrote, 5 pages. I've been writing like an inch at a time, which I'm not happy about, but that's what I can do right now. But I've started reading a lot more. Actually, Ben's book helped get me there. Because I loved it so much. And it's a page turner, and I was like, yes, I'm back. He's back. After the novel came out, I just stopped reading totally. I was too busy. I was doing lots of things, and so yeah, once I'm back in reading, the writing follows.
Your comments about sort of the editing process and not necessarily having a clear idea, but maybe you have like a general sense of a scene or a general sense of a place setting or whatever really resonated with me. Do you have any advice or tricks for how to get yourself out of your head and actually just start writing something as opposed to just overthinking it or not sort of pressing forward with something?
I do, yeah, because that's my problem all the time. I have a few things that I do. Reading fairy tales always makes me want to write something, because it's just free. They're free stories. So you go, oh, okay. I read this fairy tale called The Devil in the Green Coat, and I just took the green coat, and so I wrote a short story about a man who refuses to take off the green coat. And if I'm like with a novel, if I don't feel like writing, I just have to remind myself, like, this is bad. It's like it's trash right now, and it's not always going to be trash. Right now it is, and you just need to move forward. Don't look back, move forward. Just there's an editor, the editor of One Story magazine, Patrick Ryan. He's like, I don't believe in writer's block because just make something happen. Anything. Because what you're not writing anything in stone. It's not the law, like somebody's name, they kicked a rock, broke a window, like, anything. So I always say that to myself, anything, anything can happen. And it sometimes works, not always.
just have one short thing to add on that, which is that, I don't know if you saw this, but Zadie Smith says this thing about before Zadie Smith had her kids, she would basically reread the entirety of her project before she would edit it. So if she was writing like the final chapter of her novel, she would force herself to reread the entire novel from the beginning to then edit it. And then once she had her kids, she was like, I don't have time for this. And it forced her to write different. I'm saying this to myself because my wife and I have 2 young kids, and so I also thought, like, in the revision process, I would say, okay, you know, I changed the last sentence, time to go back to the beginning. I don't really have time for that anymore. And it's scary to change your process, but I think it gets to what you're saying about, like, even if it's not great, even if it's not perfect, like, I just gotta keep moving.
Yeah, there's also like a collage way of writing a draft. Instead of thinking I'm gonna write this draft from beginning to end. It's sort of that Anne Lamott thing of like, you know, the little
Bird by
picture thing, yeah, bird by bird, the little picture thing. And like the draft of the novel I'm writing right now, it has, here's a block of text. And then a big space and another block of text, and there's something that's gonna happen later to connect the 2 things. I can't do it right now. Sorry. And I do that a lot, even in short fiction. Just skip ahead, as long as I'm moving forward.
Is that the big things? You were saying before the big characters who write scenes.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily. Sometimes it's the same scene, and I just know there's gotta be something else to get them to this moment. Or how did they get out here, or how did he get hit in the face, or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, I'll think about it later. Kind of. So, yeah.
Maybe one last question? If there is one, if not.
You said you were reading something really beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of it is Richard's book, which I reread on the train, and deeply, deeply admire and love. Another book is, this is unfair because it's only in Galley, it's not available yet, but my friend, the poet, Kava Akbar, just wrote a novel, and I got to see an early draft of it like a year ago, and I loved it. And now he has revised it with his editor, and it is just so good. I'm biased because, you know, as a poet who wrote a novel, I tend to like, and I'm rooting for poets who write novels. His is just, it's extraordinarily good. So look out for it. I think like January or February of next year. It's called Martyr. It's by Kava Akbar.
Thank you.
Again for being here. I want to make sure that everyone comes back on Sunday, September 10th at 4 p.m. in person and on Zoom again as we launch our fall reading series with poets Nicole Callahan, Sean Thomas Doherty, and Jared Harrell. So make sure to come back for that. I also hope that everyone is able to join us for our annual benefit gala, which is Thursday, September 21 at 7 p.m. at Tappan Hill Mansion. We are going to honor Rachel Eliza Griffiths and our late board member, Herbert Haddad. If you're unable to attend, we also hope that you will consider making a donation. No contribution is too small. To do that, you can go to writerscenter.org/gala/. Thank you so much for being here. I hope everyone buys books, either online if you're on Zoom. The links to buy books are in the chat. If you're here, they're right over there. Thank you so much for being here.